Hey y'all, tonight we tumble straight into the gilded labyrinth of Versailles, where the floors are polished enough to see your own skeptical reflection, and the air always smells faintly of powdered wigs, candle wax, and the distant, ever-present dread of peasant revolt. You're here, padding softly along endless corridors, your slippers barely making a sound, though every so often you hear the faint click of Louis XVI's lockpicks as he fiddles with another hobby project. The king's latest obsession is locksmithing, which is only a little awkward when you remember that most of his subjects can't even afford bread, let alone a hobby. You pass a window and catch a glimpse of the sunrise over Paris, where the city's bakeries are already surrounded by lines of hungry, grumbling Parisians. The scent of fresh bread never quite reaches the palace, but the tension sure does. You pause by a tapestry depicting some heroic ancestor, and it occurs to you that the real action isn't in these stuffy halls, but out in the streets. Historians still argue whether the king's cluelessness was genuine or a finely tuned act, but you can't help noticing how he seems more interested in his collection of padlocks than in the angry crowds chanting outside. You slip past a cluster of courtiers gossiping about the latest scandal. Something about a diamond necklace and a queen with expensive taste. Someone mutters, "You probably won't survive this," and you can't tell if they mean the revolution or just another day in court fashion. A footman offers you a tray of pastries you can't pronounce, but you're distracted by the distant sound of a drum. The palace is a bubble, and you're starting to feel the pressure. You duck into a side room, finding Marie Antoinette herself, bored and surrounded by a mountain of correspondence. She's writing letters to her Austrian family, probably asking for cake recipes. You wonder if she's ever actually said, "Let them eat cake," or if that's just another rumor that stuck. Historians still debate it, and you're not about to ask her directly. She looks like she'd rather be anywhere else. As you wander, you notice a servant sneaking a crust of bread into his pocket. He glances at you, eyes wide, and you both share a silent understanding. Out there, bread is life, and in here, it's just another prop for a royal breakfast tableau. You drift toward a window, watching the sun climb higher, and wonder how long this fragile peace can last. The king's locksmith tools clatter in the background, a soundtrack to a world about to shatter. You lean against the cool marble, listening to the muffled sounds of the waking palace, the rustle of silk, the soft thud of shoes, the distant laughter of courtiers who have no idea what's coming. You're here on the edge of history, and even though you're just a shadow in the hallway, you can feel the ground shifting beneath your feet. The day is beginning, and so is the end of everything Versailles has ever known. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Are you winding down in Paris or just waking up in Peoria? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drift onward, the palace behind you, the city ahead, and the revolution just waiting to begin. You step out of the gilded bubble and into the cobbled veins of Paris, where the air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, sweat, and something sharper. Maybe hope, maybe hunger. Your shoes, so recently gliding across Versailles marble, now squelch in puddles left by last night's rain. You're swept along by a tide of bodies, mostly women, their faces set with the kind of determination that only comes from empty stomachs and too many broken promises. Someone hands you a drum, well, more like shoves it into your arms, and before you know it, you're keeping time for the October March, the infamous Women's March on Versailles. The crowd surges forward, frying pans clanging, voices rising in a chorus that is equal parts song and threat. You catch snippets. Bread, down with the price. Where's the flour? There's a rumor that the queen is hoarding grain, and you realize that, true or not, it's enough to fuel this march all the way to the palace gates. Historians still argue whether the women's anger was spontaneous or carefully organized, but you can feel the rawness in every step. One woman, her hair tied back with a strip of tricolor cloth, winks at you and brandishes a rolling pin like a saber. You probably won't survive this, she jokes, and you're not sure if she means the march or the bread lines. You pass a group of fishwives, famous for their sharp tongues and sharper elbows, who are debating whether to storm the king's chambers or just his bakery. One of them, barely 5 feet tall, but with the voice of a cannon, starts a chant that ripples through the crowd. You join in, your voice blending with hundreds of others, and for a moment, you forget you're supposed to be a quiet observer. The city's energy is infectious, and you find yourself swept up in the possibility that maybe, just maybe, things could change. A mainstream fact floats to the surface of your mind. These women, many of them from Les Halles, the central market, were the backbone of Parisian food distribution. When they marched, the city listened. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some of them brought along makeshift cannons. Actually, they were more like repurposed wine barrels with a few iron scraps for effect, but they looked intimidating enough to make the palace guards sweat. You spot one of these contraptions wobbling dangerously on a wooden cart, its operator grinning like a child with a new toy. The march pauses at a crossroads, and you're jostled by a woman carrying a loaf of bread as if it were a newborn. She tells you about her neighbor, who claims to have seen the king himself sneaking into a bakery at dawn. Historians still debate whether Louis ever set foot in a Paris bakery, she says with a smirk. But I know what I saw. You nod, not wanting to argue with someone who could probably take you in a wrestling match. As the march nears Versailles, the mood shifts from hopeful to electric. You can see the palace in the distance, its golden gates gleaming in the morning light. The women around you tighten their grips on whatever weapons they've brought. Knives, wooden spoons, even a few stolen muskets. The air crackles with anticipation, and you realize that this isn't just about bread anymore. It's about dignity, about being heard, about forcing the people in power to look them in the eye. You slip through the crowd, your drum forgotten as the front ranks surge forward. The palace guards, unaccustomed to facing an army of angry mothers, hesitate. For a heartbeat, all is still. Then, with a roar, the women push through, and you're swept along in a tide of righteous fury. You catch a glimpse of Marie Antoinette at a window, her face pale as she watches the crowd below. For a moment, your eyes meet, and you wonder if she understands what's happening, or if she's still thinking about cake. The gates creak open, and the crowd spills into the palace grounds. You're jostled, elbowed, nearly trampled, but somehow you stay on your feet. The women demand to see the king, to show him the faces of those he's forgotten. You find yourself at the front of the throng, staring up at the bewildered monarch as he mumbles promises of bread. Someone hands you a chunk of it, still warm from the palace ovens, and you take a bite, savoring the taste of victory, or maybe just relief. As the sun climbs higher, the marchers begin to disperse, their anger spent for now. You linger, watching as the palace returns to its uneasy calm, knowing that nothing will ever be the same. You turn away, your stomach a little fuller, your heart a little heavier, and wonder what tomorrow will bring. You wander away from the palace, your shoes caked with mud and your ears still ringing from the chants of the marchers. Paris draws you back like a magnet, its narrow streets buzzing with rumors and the clatter of horse hooves on ancient cobblestones. The city feels different now, charged, restless, as if every stone is waiting to be hurled or repurposed into a barricade. You duck into an alley near Saint-Séverin Church, where the shadows are thick and the air smells faintly of incense and spilled wine. Here, you stumble upon a curious scene. A group of apprentices, faces smudged with soot, are gathered around a makeshift stage. At its center sits a cat, looking supremely unimpressed, wearing a tiny paper hat. The ringleader, a boy barely old enough to shave, proclaims the feline guilty of witchcraft and treason against the people. You realize you've arrived just in time for the latest in a series of cat trials, a bizarre Parisian tradition that's half protest, half performance art. Historians still argue whether these animal trials were genuine acts of superstition or early forms of political satire, but you can't help but appreciate the creativity. The crowd jeers as the judge sentences the cat to exile. No animals were harmed, unless you count its dignity. As the cat saunters off, tail high, you notice a stain on the cobblestones, remnants of last week's execution, when a rooster was found guilty of crowing at the wrong hour. It's a reminder that even in times of upheaval, Parisians never lose their knack for finding the absurd in the everyday. You move on, passing a baker's shop where the window is filled with stale loaves arranged in the shape of a guillotine. The baker, a wiry man with flour in his beard, winks at you and whispers, "Bread today, heads tomorrow." You laugh, but there's a nervous edge to it. You remember that quirky tidbit about Parisian apprentices. Some formed secret societies, complete with coded handshakes and initiation rituals involving pickled herring and reciting revolutionary slogans backward. It's all fun and games until someone accidentally starts a riot. You pause at a crossroads, watching as a pamphleteer hands out leaflets denouncing the latest government decree. The crowd debates heatedly, voices rising and falling in a symphony of outrage and hope. Someone mentions the mysterious affair of the diamond necklace, and you recall that mainstream fact. This scandal, involving forged letters and a very expensive piece of jewelry, helped turn public opinion against the queen. You can't help but wonder if she ever actually wore the necklace, or if it was just another story spun by desperate Parisians. A street performer juggles apples while reciting the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, his words punctuated by the occasional dropped fruit. You catch a glimpse of a rat darting between his feet, another reminder that, for all the high ideals, Paris is still Paris. Historians still debate whether these public readings actually inspired the masses or just provided cheap entertainment. But tonight, they feel like a spark in the dark. You slip into a tavern, its walls plastered with caricatures of politicians and nobles. The air is thick with pipe smoke and the scent of onion soup. You order a bowl, savoring the warmth, and listen as the patrons argue about the latest rumors. Someone claims to have seen Robespierre himself, disguised as a commoner, buying onions at the market. You probably won't survive this, the barkeep jokes as he refills your mug, but at least you'll die with a full belly. You finish your soup and step back into the night, the city alive with possibility and peril. The bells of Notre Dame toll in the distance, marking the hour, and you realize that time itself feels slippery here, moments stretching and collapsing like the shadows in the alleyways. You walk on, your footsteps echoing on the cobblestones, wondering what strange spectacle you'll stumble upon next. You find yourself drawn toward a cluster of candlelit windows, the muffled sound of laughter and the rhythmic clacking of scissors guiding your steps. You duck inside a cramped tailor shop where the air is thick with the scent of wool, sweat, and a dash of revolutionary fervor. Here, the city's tailors work late into the night, their hands flying as they stitch together the uniform of the new era, the sans-culottes trousers. You squeeze in at a workbench, nudging aside a pile of striped fabric, and someone hands you a needle. If you can thread it, you can stay, she says, grinning. You manage, barely, and suddenly you're part of the crew. Everyone is talking at once, debating whether wooden clogs, sabots, count as patriotic footwear, or if they're too peasant chic for the revolution's image. Historians still argue whether the sans-culottes' fashion choices were a true rejection of aristocratic excess or just a clever way to avoid laundry day. You can't help but notice that, for all their talk of equality, some tailors are definitely better at hiding wine stains than others. A mainstream fact, the term sans-culottes literally means without knee breeches, the fancy silk pants favored by the upper classes. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some revolutionaries, eager to prove their street cred, would deliberately tear their old breeches in public, tossing the scraps into the Seine with great ceremony. One tailor, eyes twinkling, claims to have stitched a pair of trousers from nothing but confiscated royal bedsheets. You probably won't survive this, he jokes, but at least you'll look good when the mob comes. You listen as the group debates the latest political news, their voices rising over the hum of spinning wheels. Someone reads aloud from a pamphlet, the words sharp as scissors. liberty, equality, fraternity. The room erupts in cheers, and you join in, swept up in the energy. But not everyone is convinced. An older woman, her fingers stained with dye, mutters that slogans are all well and good, but they don't keep the rain out or the rent paid. Historians still debate whether the revolution's promises ever reached the city's poorest, or if they were just more words stitched onto the same old fabric. As the night wears on, you help him a pair of trousers for a young man headed to the National Guard. He's nervous, but proud, and you wish him luck as he slips out into the darkness. The shop quiets, the only sound the steady snip of scissors and the occasional sigh. Someone starts a song, something about freedom and bread, and soon everyone joins in, their voices weaving together like threads in a tapestry. You glance at your hands, surprised to find them stained with indigo and hope. The tailor beside you offers a flask, and you take a sip, the warmth spreading through you. To new beginnings, she says, raising her needle in salute. You echo the toast, feeling the weight of history in every stitch. Outside, the city is quieter now, the chaos of the day giving way to a hush that feels almost reverent. You step into the street, the night air cool against your skin, and look back at the shop, its windows glowing like beacons. You realize that revolutions aren't just fought in grand halls or on bloody fields. They're stitched together in places like this, one thread at a time. You walk on, your new sans-culottes trousers a little too short, your heart a little lighter. The revolution is everywhere, in every alley and attic, every whispered joke and shared flask. You wonder what tomorrow's uniform will look like, and whether you'll be brave enough to wear it. You wander into the heart of a bustling print shop where the air is thick with the scent of ink and the nervous energy of deadlines. Stacks of pamphlets and newspapers teeter on every surface, their headlines blaring the latest decrees and denunciations. The printer, a wiry man with inky fingers and a perpetual scowl, waves you over. You look like you know your way around a calendar, he says, thrusting a sheaf of papers into your hands. Help me fix these dates before the committee comes knocking. You squint at the pages, realizing you've landed smack in the middle of the great French Republican calendar experiment. Gone are the familiar months. No more January, no more July. Instead, you're living in Thermidor, or maybe Fructidor, depending on which printer you ask. Historians still argue whether this calendar reform was a stroke of rational genius or just a bureaucratic headache. You're leaning toward the latter, especially as you try to remember if it's primiti or quartiti, and whether you're supposed to be celebrating the festival of the turnip. A mainstream fact: the revolutionary government replaced the old Gregorian calendar with a new system based on decimal time, 10 days in a week, 3 weeks in a month, and each day divided into 10 hours. You try to calculate how many hours you've been awake, but the math makes your head spin. The printer grins. Don't worry, nobody else gets it either. I just write today and hope for the best. You help set type for a pamphlet denouncing hoarders, your fingers growing numb from the cold metal letters. A quirky tidbit: some Parisians desperate to keep up with the changes, started wearing pocket watches with both the old and new hours marked, just in case they needed to switch back mid-conversation. You spot one such watch dangling from a young woman's belt, its hands frozen between octidi and decadi. She shrugs. You probably won't survive this, and you're not sure if she means the calendar or the revolution in general. The print shop buzzes with gossip as you work. Someone claims the new calendar was designed to make people forget Sundays and, by extension, church. Another insists it's all a plot to confuse bakers, so they never know when to raise their prices. Historians still debate whether the calendar was truly an attack on religion or just an overzealous attempt at rationalizing life. You're just glad you don't have to memorize any more saint days. As the presses thump and the ink dries, you help bundle pamphlets for delivery. The printer offers you a crust of bread and a cup of weak coffee, and you accept gratefully, savoring the rare moment of camaraderie. Someone starts a game, betting on how long the new calendar will last before everyone gives up and goes back to the old one. The consensus: not long. You step outside, pamphlets tucked under your arm, and glance up at the sky. The stars don't seem to care what day it is, and you find comfort in their indifference. The city moves to its own rhythm, calendar or no calendar, and you fall into step, ready for whatever oddity the revolution throws at you next. You wander through the early morning mist, pamphlets still tucked under your arm, when you hear the unmistakable clatter of a crowd gathering in the Place de la Révolution. You drift toward the commotion, curiosity tugging you along like a stray thread. The square is dominated by the hulking silhouette of the guillotine, its blade gleaming in the first rays of sunlight. You can't help but shiver, though the air is warm. You edge closer, the crowd buzzing with anticipation and morbid fascination. Vendors hawk roasted chestnuts and cheap wine, their cries mingling with the low murmur of gossip. You overhear a pair of aristocrats, disguised, you suspect, by their poorly patched coats, placing bets on how many times a severed head will blink before going still. You probably won't survive this, one says, only half joking, as he palms a coin. A mainstream fact, the guillotine became the official method of execution during the Revolution, praised for its supposed humanity and efficiency. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some Parisians believe that a freshly severed head could still hear and see for a few seconds after the drop. Scientists of the day, ever curious, even conducted experiments, one famously calling a condemned man's name after the blade fell, swearing the eyelids fluttered in recognition. Historians still argue whether these stories are science or just the fevered imaginings of a city obsessed with death. You find yourself pressed against the wooden barricade, the scent of sawdust and iron filling your nose. The executioner, a tall man with a surprisingly gentle face, polishes the blade with a rag. He whistles a tune you almost recognize, something cheerful and completely out of place. He catches your eye and shrugs. It pays the bills. Nearby, a group of children play a game called Revolutionaries and Traitors, using a toy guillotine carved from scrap wood. The traitor, a ragdoll with button eyes, meets her fate over and over, the children giggling as they take turns as executioner. You marvel at how quickly the extraordinary becomes ordinary, how the machinery of terror seeps into everyday life. A woman in a faded blue dress leans in, whispering about Charlotte Corday, the assassin of Marat. She claims Corday's head blushed after the blade fell, a detail you suspect is more poetic than factual. Still, the story lingers, and you wonder how many legends are born right here in the shadow of the guillotine. The crowd shifts as the condemned man is led forward, his face pale but resolute. You watch, heart pounding, as the blade falls with a sickening finality. The crowd erupts in cheers and groans, some looking away, others craning for a better view. Historians still debate whether public executions united or traumatized the people, but today it feels like both. You slip away before the next name is called, your mind buzzing with images you wish you could forget. The city seems quieter now, the streets emptied by the spectacle. You pass a cafe where patrons argue over the latest list of traitors, their voices low and urgent. Someone jokes that soon there will be more heads in baskets than loaves in bakeries. You force a laugh, but the humor tastes bitter. As you walk, you notice a flyer pasted to a wall. Liberty, equality, fraternity, or death. You trace the words with your finger, wondering how many people have read them and felt a chill. You tuck your pamphlets away, deciding you've had enough gossip and guillotines for one day. The revolution marches on, blade gleaming, and you follow, hoping for a gentler tomorrow. You step away from the echo of the guillotine, weaving through Parisian streets, where the tension is as thick as the city's morning fog. The rumors are swirling. Louis XVI is planning an escape. You're drawn to the edge of the city, where a battered carriage waits in the shadows, horses stamping impatiently. You slip into the role of a royal servant for the night, your hands trembling as you check the wheels and brush dust from the velvet seats. The king himself emerges, awkward in a plain coat, the scent of lavender soap clinging to him like a guilty secret. Marie Antoinette follows, her eyes darting, her perfume a swirl of violets and anxiety. You help them into the carriage, your heart pounding with every creak of the door. Historians still argue whether the royal family's disguises were clever or laughably obvious. After all, who else in Varennes smells like imported soap and speaks with such perfect, unhurried French? The coachman cracks the whip, and you're off, rattling down rutted roads toward the promise of safety. The city falls away behind you, replaced by fields and the occasional startled cow. A mainstream fact, the royal family's flight to Varennes in June 1791 was a disaster. They were recognized at a tavern by a postmaster who'd seen the king's face on coins. But here's a quirky tidbit. Louis insisted on bringing his personal clock and a chest of silverware for the journey, refusing to travel without the comforts of home. You glance at the overstuffed luggage and wonder if he packed enough snacks for a revolution. The carriage lurches as a wheel hits a pothole, and you scramble to keep your balance. The king tries to make small talk, asking if you think the weather will hold. You stifle a laugh. You probably won't survive this, you think, but you just nod and adjust your cap. Marie Antoinette pulls a shawl tighter around her shoulders, her fingers trembling as she peers out into the night. The countryside rolls by, moonlit and eerily quiet. You pass through sleepy villages where the only sign of life is the occasional dog barking at your passing. At one stop, a local peasant eyes the carriage suspiciously, sniffing the air. You realize, with a jolt, that the royal family's expensive soaps and perfumes are as much a giveaway as their faces. Historians still debate whether the escape could have succeeded if they'd just tried to blend in a little better, maybe skipped the scented handkerchiefs and the silver cutlery. As dawn breaks, the carriage finally rattles into Varennes. You feel a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, you've made it. But then a crowd gathers, whispers spreading like wildfire. Someone points at the king, then at a coin, then back at the king. The postmaster steps forward, eyes wide, and suddenly you know it's over. The royal family is arrested, their escape foiled by a face on a franc and the unmistakable whiff of lavender. You stand by helplessly as soldiers surround the carriage. The king tries to maintain his dignity, but you see the fear in his eyes. Marie Antoinette clings to her children, her mask of composure slipping. The townspeople murmur, some angry, some just curious. You wonder what will happen now. Will there be mercy, or will the revolution claim more victims? You help unload the luggage, the king's precious clock ticking away the last moments of freedom. The royal family is led away, and you're left standing in the dust, the carriage empty, the road ahead uncertain. You watch as the sun rises over Varennes, the day bright and sharp, and you realize that nothing will ever be the same, not for the king, not for you, not for France. You wander back toward the countryside, the failed royal escape still fresh in your mind, and soon find yourself trudging through muddy fields under a sky heavy with clouds. The revolution, it turns out, isn't just about speeches and guillotines. It's also about numbers. You slip into the role of a peasant for a day, your hands calloused from hours of harvesting wheat, your boots caked with the kind of mud that never quite comes out. The land stretches before you, dotted with scarecrows in faded tricolor sashes, and every so often you catch the glint of a confiscated nobleman's wine bottle repurposed as a lantern. You kneel in the furrows, counting out sheaves and calculating your share. Historians still argue whether the abolition of feudal dues really changed everyday life for peasants or just swapped one tax collector for another. You run your thumb over a scrap of parchment, tallying up the old tithes and the new revolutionary levies. A mainstream fact: after August 4th, 1789, the National Assembly abolished feudal privileges, supposedly freeing peasants from centuries-old obligations to lords and priests. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some villages celebrated by holding mock funerals for the death of the tithe, parading empty coffers through the streets and singing ribald songs about their former landlords. You pause for a moment, wiping sweat from your brow, and watch as a neighbor uncorks a dusty bottle, confiscated from the chateau cellar up the hill. Equality means we all get a taste, right? He grins, pouring you a cup of surprisingly good Bordeaux. You sip, savoring the flavor of revolution, and wonder if the aristocrats ever realized how much better their wine tastes when shared. The village square is alive with barter and debate. You join a group huddled around a table, arguing over the latest land survey. Some claim the new boundaries are fair. Others grumble that the best fields always seem to end up in the hands of those with friends in Paris. You probably won't survive this, jokes an old woman as she sharpens her sickle. But at least you'll die owing no one a tithe. You laugh, but you can't help noticing the tension simmering beneath the surface. Freedom is complicated, and equality even more so. A group of children run by, waving sticks and pretending to be tax collectors. They chase a boy dressed as a bishop who shrieks with laughter as he dodges their imaginary fines. You remember that quirky tidbit about some peasants refusing to pay any taxes at all, insisting that liberty meant freedom from all forms of paperwork. Historians still debate whether rural resistance helped shape revolutionary policy or just gave bureaucrats headaches. As the sun dips low, you join your neighbors for a meal of coarse bread, cheese, and whatever vegetable survived the latest requisition. The talk turns to rumors of aristocrats hiding in the woods, plotting a comeback, and you wonder if the revolution will ever truly reach these fields. You gaze out at the patchwork of crops and hedgerows, feeling both the weight of history and the stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, things will get better. You finish your meal, brush the crumbs from your lap, and stand to stretch. The sky is streaked with the last light of day, and you take a deep breath, the scent of earth and freedom mingling in your lungs. You walk back toward your cottage, the sound of laughter and debate fading behind you, and wonder what tomorrow's harvest will bring. You wake to the sound of distant drums and the unmistakable rumble of boots on the move. The revolution's appetite is growing, and now it's hungry for soldiers. You're swept into the ranks of a ragtag battalion, your uniform a patchwork of borrowed coats and tricolor scraps. The sergeant barks orders, promising glory, liberty, and, most importantly, a hot meal. You clutch your knapsack, which is stuffed with a loaf of rye bread, so stale it could double as a weapon, a wedge of questionable cheese, and a handful of dried beans. The promise of beef stew is dangled in front of you like a carrot, but you've learned not to get your hopes up. You march through muddy roads, the countryside rolling by in a blur of green and brown. Historians still argue whether the revolutionary armies were fueled more by patriotism or by the desperate hope of a decent supper. You're starting to think it's the latter, especially when your stomach growls loud enough to startle a passing horse. A mainstream fact, the French Revolutionary Army was one of the first to be made up largely of citizen soldiers, conscripted by the levée en masse. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some recruits brought their own pots and pans, slung from their belts, and would stop mid-march to scavenge wild herbs or snare the occasional unlucky rabbit. You trudge beside a drummer boy who's barely old enough to shave, his drumsticks tapping out a rhythm that keeps your feet moving even when your legs want to quit. He tells you about his brother, who once tried to cook a rat stew in his helmet. You probably won't survive this, he laughs, but at least you'll never be bored. The older soldiers swap recipes for edible weeds and debate the merits of roasting acorns versus boiling them. Someone claims to have seen a general eating roast pheasant, but everyone agrees that's just a fairy tale for the gullible. At the next camp, you gather around a smoky fire, your knapsack now lighter, but your spirits a little brighter. You share stories and scraps, trading a bite of cheese for a sip of watered wine. The talk turns to rumors. The Austrians are massing on the border. The British Navy is blockading the coast. And somewhere, someone swears, there's a secret stash of salt pork hidden by a deserter. Historians still debate whether these rumors helped keep morale up or just made the hunger sharper. Night falls, and you curl up under a threadbare blanket, the stars wheeling overhead. The camp is alive with the sounds of snoring, whispered jokes, and the occasional burst of song. You close your eyes, the ache in your stomach fading as you drift into a restless sleep, dreaming of feasts and freedom. Dawn comes too soon. You rise, brush the dew from your coat, and join the line for breakfast. A meager bowl of gruel, but at least it's warm. The sergeant shouts, and you shoulder your pack, ready to march again. The road stretches ahead, uncertain and endless, but you keep moving, one foot in front of the other, driven by hope, hunger, and the faint, elusive promise of beef stew. You shuffle back into the city, boots scuffed and stomach growling, only to find Paris transformed into a catwalk of revolutionary fashion. Gone are the powdered wigs and silk breeches. Now, everyone flaunts the tricolor cockade, and the boldest among them sport the red Phrygian cap, tilted at a jaunty angle. You duck into a crowded cafe, careful to keep your lace cuffs hidden beneath your jacket. The room is a riot of color, striped trousers, patched waistcoats, and sashes in every shade of blue, white, and red. The air smells of coffee, pipe smoke, and the faint tang of political paranoia. You slide onto a bench beside a seamstress who's sewing cockades as fast as her fingers can fly. She eyes your cuffs and raises an eyebrow. Careful, citizen. Morning silk is out. Liberty cloth is in. You nod, tucking your hands under the table, and listen as she gossips about the latest arrests. Historians still argue whether fashion truly reflected revolutionary zeal or was just a clever way to avoid suspicion. You suspect it's a bit of both. After all, nothing says I love liberty like a hastily dyed sash covering up yesterday's aristocratic ruffles. A mainstream fact: during the height of the revolution, wearing the wrong clothes could get you denounced as a counter-revolutionary. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some daring souls wore mismatched shoes on purpose, claiming it was a subtle protest against the tyranny of symmetry. You spot a young man at the bar, one boot and one slipper, holding court as he explains that true patriots have no time for matching footwear. You probably won't survive this, he laughs, but at least you'll die in style. As you sip your coffee, the conversation shifts to the latest decree from the Committee of Public Safety. No more lace, no more silk waistcoats, and absolutely no powdered wigs. The seamstress sighs, lamenting the loss of her best customers, but admits that business is booming for tricolor ribbons and plain linen. Historians still debate whether these laws were about equality or just another way to control the restless city. You step outside, blending into the crowd as best you can. Everywhere you look, people are reinventing themselves. Bakers in Liberty aprons, street sweepers with cockades pinned to their caps, even a stray dog sporting a red ribbon around its neck. You pass a shop window displaying a mannequin dressed in the latest Patriot chic, a jacket made from repurposed military tents and breeches patched with old flags. The sign reads, "Dress for the republic you want, not the monarchy you had." You can't help but smile at the creativity, even as you feel a pang for the lost elegance of the old days. You remember a friend who once boasted of owning a dozen silk waistcoats, each more extravagant than the last. Now he wears plain wool and keeps his head down, hoping not to attract the wrong kind of attention. As dusk falls, you find yourself at the banks of the Seine, watching the city's reflection ripple in the water. You finger the cockade pinned to your lapel, wondering if it's enough to keep you safe. The revolution is everywhere, in the clothes you wear, the words you speak, the way you walk down the street. You take a deep breath, straighten your jacket, and step into the night. One more citizen in a city where fashion is a matter of life and death. You wander into the back room of a bustling print shop where the air is thick with the smell of hot metal and spilled ink. The press is running overtime, churning out pamphlets and broadsheets faster than you can blink. You're handed a stack of freshly printed pages, the ink still tacky, and tasked with proofreading a fiery new pamphlet about Robespierre, the incorruptible, as he's called. You squint at the tiny type, but your eyes are tired and your mind drifts. In your exhaustion, you let a typo slip, incorporeal. The next morning, the city is abuzz with rumors. Did Robespierre vanish through walls? Is he a ghost haunting the National Convention? You probably won't survive this, the printer laughs, but at least your mistake will be famous. A mainstream fact: pamphlets and newspapers were the lifeblood of revolutionary Paris, shaping public opinion and fueling the fires of debate. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some printers, desperate to keep up with demand, used whatever scraps of paper they could find. Old theater programs, wrapping paper, even the backs of love letters. Historians still argue whether the flood of print democratized information or just spread confusion and paranoia. You watch as a group of writers huddle around a battered desk, arguing over which scandals to highlight. One insists on including a juicy bit about Robespierre's infamous acne, claiming it's proof of his moral purity, or maybe just bad hygiene. Another wants to print a list of suspected traitors, though half the names are probably made up. The press jams mid-run, and you scramble to clear the gears, ink smearing your hands and staining your cuffs. The machine groans back to life, spitting out another round of pamphlets, each one more sensational than the last. Outside, hawkers shout headlines in the streets, their voices echoing off the stone walls. Crowds gather around the latest broadsheets, eager for news, gossip, or just something to argue about. over a bowl of onion soup. You spot a woman reading aloud to a group of neighbors, her voice rising with each accusation and rumor. Historians still debate whether these public readings united the people or turned them against each other, but tonight it feels like both. You take a break, ducking into a quiet corner with a cup of weak coffee. The printer joins you, shaking his head. I miss the days when a typo just meant an angry playwright, not a citywide conspiracy theory. You both laugh, but the tension lingers. Every word, every mistake feels like it could tip the balance between calm and chaos. As night falls, you help lock up the shop, stacking leftover papers in neat piles. You wonder how many of these pamphlets will survive the week and how many will be used to wrap fish or line bird cages. You slip a copy of your infamous typo into your pocket, a souvenir of a night when words carried more weight than bullets. You step out into the lamplit street, the city humming with secrets and stories. The revolution is as much about ink as it is about blood. And tonight, you're part of the machinery that keeps it all turning. You drift through the pre-dawn streets, pamphlets still tucked in your pocket, and follow the distant sound of drums and laughter to the Champ de Mars. The city is preparing for another grand festival, this one in honor of the Supreme Being, Robespierre's latest attempt to replace old superstitions with new ones. You find yourself pressed into service, helping to haul papier-mâché columns and fake Roman temple debris across the muddy field. Your shoes squelch with every step, and you're not sure if you're building a monument to liberty or just setting the stage for the world's oddest costume party. A mainstream fact, the Festival of the Supreme Being in 1794 was meant to inspire civic virtue and unity, but many Parisians found it forced and bewildering. You overhear a group of carpenters debating whether the Supreme Being prefers wine or cider, and someone jokes, "You probably won't survive this, but at least you'll get a free hat." You laugh, accepting a laurel wreath made from wilted cabbage leaves and trying not to trip over a fallen Corinthian capital. You help hang garlands of paper flowers, their colors already running in the morning drizzle. Historians still argue whether these revolutionary festivals truly replaced the old Catholic rituals, or if they were just an awkward overlay on traditions nobody wanted to lose. You spot a cluster of former altar boys, now dressed as priests of reason, yawning through their lines and sneaking sips of wine behind a cardboard obelisk. As the festival begins, a parade of citizens in togas and tricolor sashes circles the field, their faces a mix of boredom and bemusement. Children chase each other with wooden swords, while a brass band struggles to stay in tune. You join a group of dancers, stumbling through the steps of a Liberty waltz that feels suspiciously like the old May Day reel. Someone in the crowd starts a chant, but it fizzles out when the rain picks up, sending everyone scrambling for shelter beneath the fake temple. A quirky tidbit: some enterprising vendors sell revolutionary relics, bits of plaster chipped from the festival set, hawked as lucky charms for a few sous. You buy one just for the novelty and tuck it into your pocket alongside your pamphlet. The woman selling them winks. If you believe hard enough, maybe it'll keep you dry. You wander through the crowd, catching snippets of conversation, some earnest, some mocking, all tinged with exhaustion. Historians still debate whether these festivals brought people together or just gave them something new to complain about. You suspect it's a little of both, especially when you see a group of old women comparing the Supreme Being's festival to last year's Feast of Reason and deciding the wine was better then. As the day wears on, the rain lets up and the sun peeks through the clouds. The crowd gathers for the grand finale. Robespierre himself, perched atop a man-made mountain, delivering a speech about virtue and destiny. You can barely hear him over the yawns and the giggles, but you clap along anyway, swept up in the spectacle. When the festival finally ends, you help clear away the soggy decorations, your laurel wreath drooping. You trudge home, shoes squelching, pockets full of relics, and head full of questions. The revolution is always inventing new rituals, but you wonder if any of them will stick. You wander through the maze of Paris, the festival's leftover confetti still clinging to your coat, and find yourself drawn to the hulking shadow of the Bastille. The fortress is mostly rubble now, its stones carted off as souvenirs, but the legend lingers. You slip through a side gate and descend into the cool, damp corridors of what's left of the prison. A guard, bored and nursing a chipped tooth, waves you through with barely a glance. You probably won't survive this, he mutters, more out of habit than menace. You're ushered into a cramped cell, where your new cellmate greets you with a lopsided grin and a battered tin plate. Dinner, he says, presenting you with a scoop of what might generously be called rat pâté. You hesitate, but hunger wins. The taste is memorable, a mainstream fact. When the Bastille was stormed in July 1789, only 7 prisoners were found inside, hardly the teeming dungeon of legend. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some of those prisoners were so comfortable they reportedly asked to stay, preferring prison meals and routine to the chaos outside. Your cellmate regales you with tales of famous inmates, madmen, forgers, and the occasional political dissident. He claims to have shared a cell with a man who wrote poetry on the walls, using beet juice and candle soot. Historians still argue whether the Bastille was a true symbol of tyranny or just a convenient scapegoat for revolutionary rage. You run your fingers over the rough stone, searching for traces of old graffiti, and find a crude drawing of a loaf of bread, proof that, even in prison, Parisians never stop thinking about food. The guards pace the halls, debating whether 7 prisoners really justified the storming or if it was all just a convenient excuse for a party. You listen as they swap recipes for rat stew and argue over the best way to catch pigeons in the courtyard. Your cellmate offers you a crust of bread and a sip of something that might be wine, might be vinegar. It's hard to tell in the dark. As night settles in, you and your cellmate trade stories to pass the time. He tells you about a nobleman who smuggled love letters out in the seams of his coat, and a mad inventor who tried to tunnel to freedom using only a spoon and sheer optimism. Historians still debate whether these escape attempts were acts of desperation or just boredom gone wild. You drift off to sleep on a straw mattress, the sounds of the prison, snoring, distant laughter, the drip of water echoing through the stone, lulling you into a strange, uneasy peace. You dream of freedom, of feasts, of sunlight on cobblestones, and wake to the reality of another day behind bars. When morning comes, your cellmate shares his secret recipe for rat pâté. The trick is in the seasoning, and you can't help but laugh. The revolution rages on outside, but in here, life is reduced to simple pleasures. A warm meal, a good story, and the hope that tomorrow might bring something better. You're released from the Bastille's chilly embrace with a handshake and a wink from your cellmate. Try not to get arrested again, unless you miss my cooking. You step into the pale morning light, free but changed, and wander toward the city's edge where whispers of exile drift through the air like autumn leaves. The revolution has rolled on, and now it's 1799. Paris is buzzing with rumors of a new leader, a Corsican with a sharp uniform and sharper ambitions. You find yourself in a cluttered attic, packing a battered trunk for a man named Bonaparte. You sort through piles of uniforms, medals, and, oddly enough, several pairs of socks. He's particular about his socks, a fellow servant confides, folding a pair with military precision, marches on his feet, wins with his toes. You can't help but laugh, thinking how history's tides sometimes turn on the smallest things. A mainstream fact: Napoleon's Egyptian campaign was a spectacle of both glory and disaster, with soldiers battling not only enemies, but fleas, sand, and sunstroke. Here's a quirky tidbit. The army's lice became so resilient that some say that they gave rise to a new breed of imperial lice, tougher than any that had crawled through Europe before. You stuff a well-worn undershirt into the trunk and wonder if it will end up in a museum someday. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's rise was the inevitable outcome of revolutionary chaos or just the luck of a brilliant opportunist. You're more concerned with whether you've packed enough lavender sachets to keep the lice at bay. The attic is filled with the nervous energy of departure. You help polish boots, fold maps, and tuck a half-eaten wedge of cheese into a pocket for luck. Outside, the street is alive with the sounds of soldiers drilling and merchants hawking genuine Egyptian relics that look suspiciously like painted rocks. You pause at the window, watching a parade of uniforms march by, their buttons gleaming in the morning sun. A messenger bursts in, breathless, waving a letter sealed with a wax eagle. "Orders from the general," he shouts, and everyone scrambles. You're handed a bundle of letters, each one addressed to a different city: Marseille, Lyon, even Rome. You wonder if any of them contain words of peace, or if it's all just more orders for bread, boots, and bullets. You slip outside, the trunk heavy in your arms, and make your way to the waiting carriage. Napoleon himself appears, smaller than you expected, but radiating confidence. He nods in your direction, eyes sharp, and you feel the weight of history pressing down. You load the trunk, careful not to crush the socks, and step back as the carriage rattles away, bound for destiny. Historians still debate whether the revolution truly ended here, or if it simply changed uniforms. You watch the carriage disappear into the distance, the city humming with anticipation and anxiety. You realize you've packed a piece of the old world alongside the new. Lace cuffs tucked next to tricolor cockades, a bottle of wine hidden beneath a map of Egypt. As dusk falls, you wander through the city, the air thick with possibility. You pass a group of children playing at soldiers, their wooden swords clashing as they argue over who gets to be Napoleon. You smile, remembering your cellmate's advice. Survive the day, and you'll see what tomorrow brings. The revolution has exiled kings and crowned generals, but Paris endures, hungry, hopeful, and always ready for the next chapter. You linger in Paris as the century turns, the city's heartbeat slower, but no less fierce. The echoes of revolution still rattle the shutters and seep into the stones beneath your feet. You find yourself drawn to the narrow, winding streets of the Marais, where rumors of another uprising flicker like candlelight in the gloom. Barricades rise again, though now they're built from broken furniture and scavenged timbers. Some say the wood is recycled from old guillotines, splintered and stained with history. You run your hand along a rough plank, wondering whose story lingers in its grain. The city is restless, its people scarred but stubborn. You join a crowd gathered behind a makeshift barricade, your hands calloused from years of work and worry. Historians still argue whether the spirit of 1789 ever truly faded, or if each new protest is just the next verse in an endless revolutionary song. A mainstream fact: in 1832, Paris erupted in rebellion once more, immortalized by Victor Hugo and sung by dreamers for generations. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some barricade builders swore by using old bed frames for extra strength, claiming nothing could withstand the fury of a Parisian denied his sleep. You help hoist a mattress atop the barricade, trading tired jokes with your neighbors. You probably won't survive this, someone whispers, but you just shrug and keep stacking. The air is thick with anticipation, the kind that prickles your skin and makes every sound seem louder. Someone starts humming a tune, soft at first, then louder as others join in. It's a melody you've heard before, passed down through years of hope and heartbreak. As night falls, the city glows with lanterns and the promise of change. You sit atop the barricade, legs dangling, watching as the world holds its breath. You think of all you've seen, the golden halls of Versailles, the muddy fields of the countryside, the shadowed cells of the Bastille, the fevered crowds at the Guillotine, and the quiet moments in between. You wonder what stories tomorrow will bring, and whether the revolution will ever truly end. You close your eyes, letting the sounds of the city wash over you. Laughter, song, the distant rumble of wheels on cobblestone. The barricade beneath you is solid, built from the bones of history and the dreams of the living. You breathe in the night air, thick with memory, and feel the gentle weight of sleep settling on your shoulders. The city's pulse slows, lanterns flickering softly in windows as the last voices fade into gentle murmurs. You lie back atop the barricade, the wood warm beneath you, and let your breath fall into rhythm with the quiet hush of Paris at rest. The moon drifts behind a veil of cloud, casting a silvery glow over rooftops and river. Every sound softens, the distant clop of a horse's hooves, the flutter of a pigeon's wings, the faint echo of a lullaby sung to a restless child. Your hands, rough from work and worry, relax at your sides. The tension in your shoulders eases as you remember the laughter of friends, the taste of bread shared in hunger, the comfort of a borrowed coat on a cold night. The revolution's storms have passed for now, leaving behind a gentle peace that settles over the city like a blanket. You picture the Seine flowing quietly through the heart of Paris, its waters carrying away the dust of old battles and the whispered hopes of 1,000 dreamers. As you drift, the stories of the past blend with the promise of tomorrow, each breath drawing you deeper into rest. The barricades of memory dissolve, replaced by the soft certainty that, for tonight, you are safe and at ease. The world outside grows distant, its worries muffled by the steady beat of your own heart. You surrender to the comfort of sleep, knowing that dawn will bring new light, new stories, and the gentle resilience of a city that never truly sleeps. Good night, dreamer. Let the echoes of revolution lull you into the calmest of rests.